There's something about silence that unsettles the human mind, especially when it's coming from a place that should be filled with noise. That's what the neighbors said. For days, the old house on the edge of Wáng County had been eerily quiet. No lights, no movement, just the low, smoky scent of something off. It wasn't until a relative came knocking that the truth started to reveal itself, one thin crack at a time. Inside the small, cluttered kitchen, the walls near the stove were scorched black. A strange smell lingered in the air like burnt fabric or worse. The officers who stepped into the room would later say they felt something was wrong, something unnatural. Their instincts told them to look closer. In the bedroom, there it was. A patch of concrete in the center of the floor, still uneven with signs it had been poured recently. Slight cracks zigzagged across the surface like the floor itself was trying to speak. They brought in tools. They dug. And beneath that patch of concrete they found the charred remains of a man, partially burned, partially decomposed, but unmistakably human. Some clothing still clung to the body. The flesh that hadn't burned emitted an odor that clung to the walls. The man had been missing for nearly a week.
He wasn't a stranger to the town.
And the house he was buried in,
it didn't even belong to him.
I can't help but wonder, how did this happen in such a quiet place? And who went to such lengths to make a man disappear only to hide him right under their own floor? That's where this story begins. Was it love betrayal or something much darker?
It began on November 22, 2017, in the rural outskirts of Wáng County, Inner Mongolia. That evening, Jianjun, a 44-year-old man known by many in the town, was out drinking with friends. He was reportedly in good spirits, chatting and laughing like usual. But at some point during the evening, Du stood up and told the group he had to leave early. Something had come up, he said. He promised to make it up to them next time. He never came back.
2 days later, one of his close friends, Li Yangjia, arrived at the local police station, clearly concerned. He told officers that he had lost contact with Du after the night of the gathering. No calls had gone through, no one had seen him, and his family, they were just as worried. After searching on their own with no luck, they turned to the authorities. Police initially treated the case as a standard missing persons report, but details soon began to emerge that made the case more troubling. When officers visited Du's home, his wife Ma Hui told them something unsettling. Du's clothes, wallet, bank cards, and cell phone were all still at home. Nothing had been packed, nothing had been used. It was as if he had vanished without even planning to leave. Naturally, the idea of him running away or abandoning his life was ruled out quickly. There were no ransom calls either, so kidnapping didn't seem likely. But then another factor came into play the night he went missing. Du had been drinking heavily. Some speculated he might have had an accident. There was a narrow canal near the road between the bar and his home, but water levels were low, and Du, being nearly 6 feet tall, was unlikely to drown without struggle. Search teams combed the nearby forest edges and drainage ditches. Still no trace. Then came the first real break. A neighbor named Hui Lu came forward claiming he saw something that night. Around 10 p.m., Hui had stepped outside his home to relieve himself when he saw Du being confronted and physically attacked by a man whose face was obscured. He ran toward the scene to intervene, and the attacker fled into the darkness. Hui helped Du to his feet, but Du insisted he was fine and could make it home on his own. He even scolded Hui for interfering. It was the last time anyone saw Du Jianjun alive. Based on Hui's account, police asked him to describe the suspect. Unfortunately, it was dark, and the man had been wearing a mask and hat. All Hui could say was that the attacker seemed to be about Du's age, slim, and roughly 5'7" in height. Investigators were now dealing with a suspected assault just before Du vanished. They interviewed people in the area with similar height and build, but the search hit a dead end. Nothing stuck. So they shifted focus from the streets to Du's social circle. That's when things started to unravel. Neighbors had plenty to say. Du, it turns out, wasn't exactly well loved. Many described him as aggressive, especially toward his wife and children. He didn't hold a steady job and was financially dependent on his in-laws. Worst of all, Du was known for cheating, carrying on relationships with multiple women even while living under the same roof as his wife. Ma Hui and Du were technically still married, but they were separated emotionally. They lived in the same home, barely speaking. According to her close friend Wang Xiaohua, just a week before Du disappeared, Ma had shown up at her door crying. She told her friend that Du had assaulted her again and she couldn't take it anymore. She was counting the days until their court hearing. When asked whether Ma could have been involved in her husband's disappearance, Wang was doubtful. "She's always been quiet. She doesn't fight back. She just endures," she said. But that's not what the neighbors thought. They told investigators that Ma had been acting strangely since Du vanished, too calm, too detached. She hadn't even filed the missing persons report. Her demeanor raised eyebrows. So the police decided to keep a closer watch. That's when they noticed something else: late-night visits between Ma and none other than Li Yangjia, the very man who reported Du missing. It wasn't just one visit. It was several. And always after dark. They'd meet outside, look around nervously, then disappear inside for hours. It wasn't the behavior of two grieving friends. Suddenly, a new possibility emerged. Du Jianjun didn't just go missing. Maybe someone wanted him gone. With Du Jianjun still missing and suspicions growing, investigators ramped up surveillance on both Ma Hui and Li Yangjia. Their behavior wasn't just suspicious, it was secretive. Late-night meetings, doors quickly shut, lights off as soon as anyone approached. Whatever they were doing, they didn't want to be seen. The police didn't move in immediately. They waited. They watched. They wanted more. Then a surprising turn. Hui Lu, the neighbor who had seen Du attacked on the night of his disappearance, came forward again. He told police he believed he had spotted the same man from that night. The man was wearing identical clothing, had a similar build, and had passed through the neighborhood recently. Hui was confident enough this time to say, "That's him." He tried to keep the man in sight, but as soon as they locked eyes, the suspect bolted, disappearing into a crowd. It was frustrating but not fruitless. Hui had gotten a clear look at his face. Based on his description, a forensic sketch artist produced a composite image. At the same time, detectives continued probing into Ma Hui's movements. What they found added a deeper layer of complexity. Security footage and local reports confirmed that she had visited Li Yangjia's home multiple times, always after midnight. When questioned separately, both gave conflicting accounts. Ma admitted they were romantically involved. Yangjia denied it. But after hours of questioning, Yangjia broke. Yes, they had been seeing each other, he confessed. He hadn't told the truth earlier because he feared it made him look guilty. Still, he insisted, "I didn't kill Du Jianjun. I didn't even like him, but I didn't hurt him." Yangjia even produced alibis from the friends who had been with him the night Du vanished. Police verified his story. He was cleared. But Ma Hui's alibi didn't hold up. She had been home alone with her son. No witnesses. No timeline. No one to say what she had or hadn't done. Then, in a development that would shake the investigation wide open, Hui Lu's mystery man was found and brought in. His name was Tao Zi, a 37-year-old who lived on the outskirts of the county. At first, he denied everything, but when shown the sketch and pressed by investigators, his story cracked.
Tao confessed.
He said he had been paid by someone to assault Du Jianjun, not to kill him, just rough him up. And the person who paid him, Li Yangjia, according to Tao, Yangjia had approached him with a story Du was abusive to his wife. Yangjia said he couldn't stand by anymore. Tao was hesitant until money changed hands. A lot of it. On the night of the attack, Tao waited for Du, ambushed him, and ran off when Hui intervened. He assumed that was the end of it. But a few hours later, something gnawed at him. Curious or perhaps guilty, he circled back. That's when he saw Du walking toward a quiet neighborhood home. Tao didn't follow. He just watched. That house, it belonged to a woman named Xiāo Diǎn, and days later she too would vanish. Police raced to her home. The lights were off, doors locked, but something inside felt wrong. One bedroom had been torn apart, drawers open, clothes scattered. No signs of a struggle, yet nothing added up. Why would a woman flee so suddenly and so messily? Then came another twist. A new missing persons report. A young man named Wáng Bà, 24, who lived just a few doors down from Xiāo Diǎn, hadn't been seen in days. When officers entered his home with permission from his guardian, the air was thick with an acrid burnt odor. The kitchen had black scorch marks. In the bedroom, a patch of fresh cement, uneven, cracked. They dug, and underneath that patch,
Du Jianjun's burned body.
the small town of Wulin was no stranger to gossip. But this was beyond anything the locals had ever whispered about. One man dead burned and buried beneath another man's bedroom. A second person, Xiāo Diǎn, missing without a trace. And now a quiet young neighbor, Wáng Bà, suddenly at the center of a murder investigation.
But who was Wáng Bà?
On the surface, he was the last person anyone would expect. 24 years old, shy, respectful, and raised by his uncle after losing his parents in a car accident. He had recently returned to his hometown to work at a factory 3 kilometers away. His neighbors described him as soft-spoken and polite. He kept to himself and rarely socialized. That's what made it so unsettling. Police were convinced that if Wáng Bà hadn't killed Du Jianjun himself, he at least knew what had happened. But with Wang now missing too, the race was on. Then a quiet breakthrough. A young woman named Xiāo Diǎn, who lived nearby, came forward. She told police something that at the time had felt harmless. She had often seen Wáng Bà chatting with Xiāo Diǎn. Sometimes, she said, their conversations seemed warmer than friendly. She wasn't sure what their relationship was, but something about it had stood out. It gave police an angle maybe Wang and Xiāo were romantically involved. But if that was true, where was she? And why was Du Jianjun's body in Wang's home? That's when another tip came in. Quang Tu Dui, a cousin of Xiāo Diǎn, told police he had received a strange call from her on November 23rd, the day after Du disappeared. She sounded scared, Dui said. She said she was in trouble but hung up before explaining. At the time, he assumed she was being dramatic, but now he was terrified. To police, the call sounded like a cry for help. But whether Diane was still alive remained a mystery. And the deeper they looked into her, the more complicated her story became. Locals described her as attractive, well-dressed, and noticeably younger-looking than her age. Her husband, Hua Van Lo, worked far away and only came home during the Lunar New Year. Their child studied at a boarding school. That meant for most of the year, Xiāo lived alone. And according to neighbors, she didn't like being alone. She often visited the nearby town center, chatting with strangers, enjoying attention. Some saw her as flirtatious, even vain, but beneath that surface was something more painful: loneliness.
That's when she met Du Jianjun.
Du, older and charming in his own rough way, offered her something she didn't get at home: attention, validation, and promises. The two began a secret relationship. They used unregistered phone numbers. They met only at night. And Du, according to her later confession, stayed over at her house 3 times a week.
But while she was involved with Du, another man had entered her life, Wáng Bà.
He wasn't bold like Du. He was sweet, eager to please, and visibly enamored with her. He borrowed tools. He asked for help with groceries. He brought little gifts. Slowly, she allowed him into her life. And then she let him into her heart. What neither of them knew was that Du had already sensed something was off. A man like him, used to juggling women, knew when he was no longer in control. He didn't confront her, not right away. Instead, he watched. He waited. And one night while Wáng Bà was visiting Diane's home, the truth exploded. While Diane was in the bathroom, Wang glanced at her phone. A message popped up from Du. It was intimate, suggestive, and it made everything clear. The man, Wáng Bà, had once looked up to a man who had introduced him to gambling and who pretended to be a mentor, had also been secretly seeing the woman he loved. Something inside Wang snapped. He later told police that he couldn't think clearly. Jealousy took over. Rage blurred his vision. He used Diane's phone to lure Du over, pretending to be her. When Du arrived at the door, Wang was waiting with a knife.
Du didn't stand a chance.
What followed was chaos. Blood. Screams. Diane, startled by the noise, emerged to find Du bleeding out on her floor. She broke down. Wang tried to calm her. "I'll handle it," he said. "No one will know." Together, they cleaned the scene. They stuffed the body into a sack. They brought it back to Wang's house. They tried to burn it in the kitchen, but the fire wasn't strong enough. So they dug a hole in the bedroom floor, poured concrete, and hoped it would be enough. Then they fled.
But nothing stays buried forever.
When police finally tracked them down at a modest hotel in a neighboring town, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Room 2009 was quiet. No resistance, no escape attempt. Just two people, Wáng Bà and Xiāo Diǎn, waiting, tired, silent, as if they knew it was only a matter of time.
Back at the station, interrogators started with Wang. He sat, arms folded, lips pressed tight. For hours he refused to speak, but beside him Xiāo Diǎn broke down almost immediately. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed piece by piece the story of the affair, the confrontation, the killing, the attempted cover-up. She didn't paint herself as innocent, but she insisted, "I didn't know he was going to kill anyone. I didn't want anyone dead. I couldn't stop what happened." Wáng Bà listened in silence.
Then he too spoke, and for the first time since Jianjun vanished, the full picture came into focus. The anger, the betrayal, the impulsive violence born from jealousy and emotional manipulation. It wasn't a premeditated plan, it was a spontaneous eruption of rage, and yet it was a decision with irreversible consequences. Wang admitted that he had attacked Du with a kitchen knife, that he'd dragged his body through the night, that he'd tried to burn the evidence, and when that failed, poured cement over the grave he had dug in his own bedroom. "I couldn't stand the thought of him touching her again," he said. "I lost everything in that moment."
The trial began 3 months later.
Media attention was minimal. The town was quiet, but everyone seemed to know the story. In court, the prosecution presented forensics phone records, confessions, and the evidence found in Wang's home. The burned fabric, the blood splatter, the autopsy, the motive. The defense didn't deny the killing. They focused on emotional instability, mental trauma, and the manipulation Wang had suffered at the hands of both Du and Diǎn. They called it a crime of emotional collapse. The court disagreed.
The verdict was clear.
Wáng Bà was found guilty of intentional homicide. The court emphasized the brutality of the attack and the attempt to destroy evidence. He was sentenced to death. Xiāo Diǎn, on the other hand, was charged with aiding and abetting the concealment of a crime. The court recognized her confession, her lack of prior record, and her apparent remorse, but it also noted her active role in helping hide a body and flee the scene. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Neither showed much reaction. There was no outburst, no sobbing, no screaming, just silence. The kind that settles when the weight of consequences finally presses down. As the judge read the final statements, he paused briefly, a rare moment of humanity. "This court sees not only the loss of one life," he said, "but the destruction of 3 families. And that, I think, is what hits the hardest. Because when justice is served in cases like this, it's not about victory. It's about loss. About 3 people drawn together by loneliness, infidelity, and emotional manipulation, tearing each other apart in the dark, while the rest of the world kept turning."
It's easy to look at Wáng Bà and say he's the villain.
But maybe, just maybe, he was also a victim, not of murder, but of something more quiet, more insidious.
Loneliness, obsession, and the aching desire to feel wanted.
Wáng County returned to silence, not the eerie kind that first signaled something was wrong, but a deeper, quieter hush. The kind that follows scandal, the kind that lingers in alleyways and village gatherings, in whispers behind closed doors. People still walked past Xiāo Diǎn's empty house, now boarded up. The cement patch in Wáng Bà's bedroom had been torn up the floor, permanently scarred. And Du Jianjun, once the center of so much drama and destruction, was buried finally in a marked grave. But what lingered was not just the story of a crime.
It was the discomfort of realizing how close this tragedy had always been, how ordinary the people involved were. Not monsters, not masterminds, just people.
People who made choices. Some neighbors blamed Du Jianjun, his history of abuse, his string of affairs. He played with fire, they said. Others condemned Xiāo Diǎn for her manipulation, for enjoying the attention, for failing to take responsibility before it was too late. And of course, many couldn't forgive Wáng Bà, the boy next door who turned into a killer. But beneath the judgment you could feel something else: pity. This wasn't a case of premeditated evil. It was a slow-burning tragedy made from common ingredients: loneliness, secrecy, and emotional neglect. The kind of pain that builds up quietly until someone snaps. I can't help but wonder, how many others are out there right now on the edge of a similar spiral? This case also exposed something unsettling about rural isolation. When your world is small and your lifelines are few, people cling to whatever connection they can find, healthy or not. For Xiāo Diǎn, it was attention. For Wáng Bà, it was love. For Jianjun, maybe it was control. And in the end, none of them walked away whole.
The public response was divided. Online, the story went viral. Twisted love triangle. Affair ends in blood. Hashtags trended. The phrase "final confession" popped up repeatedly. Some people shared the story as a warning. Others picked it apart for gossip. But very few paused to ask the hard questions. Why didn't anyone step in when Ma Hui was being abused? Why did no one notice how emotionally unstable Wáng Bà had become?
Why did everyone ignore the signs? The courts had done their job. Justice in the legal sense had been served. But justice doesn't always bring closure.
Ma Hui never spoke publicly. She moved away shortly after the trial. Hua Vanlo, Xiāo Diǎn's husband, never remarried. And Wáng Bà's uncle, who had raised him from childhood, reportedly stopped speaking to reporters entirely.
3 families torn apart, 1 man dead, 2 behind bars. A small town left with more questions than answers. And maybe that's the point.
Because when we talk about true crime, we often focus on the crime itself. The act, the evidence, the trial. But sometimes the most important parts are the things that happened before any law was broken. The small choices, the ignored red flags, the quiet cries for help that never reached anyone's ears.
This case didn't begin with a knife. It began with silence.
And now, as we close the final chapter, I have to ask,
how many lives could be saved if we listened sooner?
Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Was justice served, or was this a deeper tragedy that no courtroom could ever resolve?